My books, The Origin of Names, Words, and Everything in Between, volumes 1 and 2, are available to purchase from most major booksellers in all major formats. Order your copies today so you can enjoy these books for yourself and help support the channel.
Africa is one of the most important continents in human history, primarily because we humans are believed to have ultimately come from this part of the world, before we slowly spread across the entire globe. Suffice to say, being the birthplace of humans means that this is a pretty special place. Yet despite the continent's deep importance, the land has a long history of being deeply mistreated by outside powers. This was most prominently seen during the scramble for Africa of the 19th century, when European powers claimed the majority of the continent for themselves, exploiting the people and the land, with perhaps the most atrocious thing happening during this time period being the infamous Congo Free State, ruled by King Leopold II of Belgium. Yet even prior to this scramble, the people of Africa had for a long time been taken away from their homeland and sent across the world in the North Atlantic slave trade. Only in relatively more recent times have the countries of the continent become independent from European powers, and in some cases many still struggle to find peace and prosperity. What this all shows us, however, is that for some time the natives of Africa haven't had too much control over the continent, and that is even apparent in the name of Africa. We aren't entirely sure where the name of Africa comes from, but we have multiple theories. These range from coming from a Greek term meaning without cold, due to the heat there compared to Europe, from the Latin aprica meaning sunny, or possibly from the Phoenician term afar meaning dust, due to the geography of the land. This gives us a few examples of its origin, just to give you a few ideas. While we don't know the exact origin of this name, all these etymologies have one thing in common. None of them derive from native African roots. These are names bestowed upon the land by the Greeks, Romans, and Phoenicians, and most of these names originally only applied to the north of the continent, and slowly over time got applied to more land as it became known to Eurasian powers. Africa, of course, isn't the only continent to not have a modern name of native roots. The term of America, which is applied to North and South America, comes from the name of the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci. Australia's name derives from the Latin term of Terra Australis Incognita, meaning unknown southern land, a name for a hypothetical southern landmass in the world used prior to the European finding of the land. When Australia was discovered by European powers, they applied this term to it. Even Antarctica's name isn't of native origins, but we'll let that one slide as there's no natives there to name it, minus the penguins I suppose. European and Asia on the other hand might have names of native origin respectively, but there's also a chance they come from opposing origins, with Europe's name coming from an Asian language and Asia's name coming from a European language. We aren't entirely sure. What would be really great, however, is if all the continents could instead have names of native origins, names for the land shaped by languages and people who natively inhabit them. In the case of Africa, that could be a reality. Various sources claim that there is a long forgotten name for the continent, one that was used in the land before it came under European influence, and unlike the term of Africa itself, it is actually of native origins, that being the name of Alkebulan. How cool is that, right? A native name for the continent that the land could go by, one that predates the name of Africa, one free of colonial influence. Someone go call the United Nations group of experts of geographical names and tell them to control F Africa for Alkebulan. It all sounds too good to be true, right? And well, that might very well be the case. You'd think a native name for Africa would be something a tad more well known to the wider world, in the same vein of many people known a country's exonym and endonyms. Or there may be more news on this name change happening, like the occasional news story you see about people in New Zealand wishing for the country to go by its Maori name of Aotearoa. Yet this name isn't all that well known of. As someone who has dedicated almost the last 9 years of their life to all things names, I had never heard of this one. In fact, I only came across it when I was researching a different video, stumbled across the name Alkebulan and found that more interesting than what I was previously researching and made this video instead. The key reason as to why this supposed native original name for Africa is so heavily debated is due to the circles and groups of people who tend to promote it, those being Afrocentric and African nationalist circles. These are people who believe that Africa has for so long been under the rule of colonial powers and wish for the continent to have its history told from its own perspective in a positive way, due to the fact that for so long the history and culture of the land have mainly been presented by outsiders. Afrocentrism can be found in the continent itself, but also found in people who have ancestry from Africa, like African Americans in the USA an example. There is validity to this viewpoint. It's understandable why people of African origins would want their continent to have a stronger native identity after being under European rule for so long. While under European rule, many African cultures and traditions were shunned and have been lost to time. It's completely understandable understandable why many people are angry about this. Afrocentrism and African nationalism could be seen as a byproduct of European colonization of the continent. If European powers like the UK and France never claimed the land, Africa could have flourished in its own unique way. But in our timeline, we never got to see that. And it's this image of Africa that Afrocentric people yearn for. Yet it can unfortunately at times manifest itself in extreme and angry ways, which in turn can damage the image of Africa even more so. In all honesty, this is a pretty difficult subject for a British person sitting in their office to tackle, so apologies to any toes I might have stepped on while bumbling through this part of the video. What you need to know in regards to the name Alkebulan, however, is the fact that many Afrocentric people and groups share this name online and in other places to help promote their idea of a more native Africa, one that even has a name of native origins, but the facts just really aren't there in favour of this name. When you Google Alkebulan, sources come up ranging from articles to Facebook posts, and they cite one Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, a Senegalese historian. He is seen as a leading figure on the use of this name, and supposedly claimed that this was the ancient name for the land in his book, Kemetic History of Africa, and it was used by the Moors, Nubians, Numidians, Carthaginians, and Ethiopians. This is where the first red flag comes up. While Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop was indeed a real person, and is highly respected in African history circles, there is no evidence he ever wrote this book or used the name Alkebulan, let alone claim that it's Africa's native name. In fact, there's no real evidence of this book existing at all, regardless of who wrote it. Yet many people use this seemingly made up claim from a seemingly made up book to promote this idea. Also, none of these articles explain when the name was actually being used, just a nebulous idea that was used in Africa's past. Then we have the issue over what the name Alkebulan actually means and where it comes from. Various sources claim that it means different things. Some claim that it comes from unknown origins and means the motherland or the Garden of Eden, while others claim that it's from Arabic origins and means the land of the blacks. Both these etymologies fly in the face of the idea that this name is native to the land. First, we have the idea that this name means the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is a location found in the Abrahamic religions, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It was where the first humans of Adam and Eve lived. While these religions have now spread into Africa to varying degrees, they probably weren't as commonplace in the supposed time the name Alkebulan first came into being. Why would a name of distinctly African origins reference something which very much isn't of African origins? As mentioned, it just doesn't fully add up. Then we have the idea that it comes from Arabic and means the land of the blacks. Once again, there's an issue with this. Like the Abrahamic religions, Arabic now has a strong foothold in Africa, especially in the north of the continent, which primarily speaks various forms of Arabic after the Muslim conquest of the 7th century. Yet Arabic is not a native language to the land. It came from the distinctly Asian Arabian Peninsula and spread there. Once again, why are people claiming it's a native name for the land, while also claiming that it comes from a clearly non-native language? But also it's not really Arabic, despite looking somewhat Arabic. A closer approximation to the land of the blacks in Arabic is Balad as-Sudan, which looks or sounds nothing like Alkebulan. So I guess that's 2 nails in the coffin for the idea that this name means the land of the blacks in Arabic. While its etymologies kind of squash the idea that it's a native name, what about the idea that it's older than the name of Africa? Well, once again, the facts really just aren't there. We have no real idea when this name of Alkebulan came into being. It just seemed to have sprouted up and spread in various circles who wished it to be true. A user on one Quora post I found claimed the earliest evidence they could find for the name dates back to a 16th century French text. And while that is a long time ago, we have much earlier evidence of Africa or forms of that name being used. This title was used in the age of antiquity by the Romans and Greeks for parts of the land. There was literally someone in ancient Rome called Scipio Africanus who earned that title after a military victory against Hannibal Barca of the Carthaginian Empire in Africa. He died in 183 BC, which is just a tad before the 16th century. Of course, the name Alkebulan could have been used prior to this, but the evidence just isn't there. Then there's also the linguistic and geographic issues with the name. Africa is a huge continent, continent, with a total landmass of over 30 million kilometers squared. It's around 3 times the size of Europe. On top of this, the continent has thousands of native languages. It's highly unlikely that one singular name could overcome the absolutely massive geographic and linguistic barriers that Africa presented in the ancient past. This name of Alkebulan has all the trappings of a folk etymology. We have a video dedicated to them, but they're basically fake etymologies, or entire words in this case, which while aren't true in their origins, have perpetuated in their popularity. One of the main reasons folk etymology spread is because they strengthen and validate group identity, according to the author of Word Myths, David Wilton, a book that deals extensively with folk etymology. This is exactly what the name Alkebulan does. It validates people with Afrocentric views and gives them a united name to go with their cause to make an Africa with its own unique identity. I understand completely why many people would want Africa to have a name of native origins. The continent has been dealt an incredibly bad hand, putting it bluntly. It has been pillaged by other outside powers for its land, resources, and even its people in the past. This awful treatment of the continent from outsiders has manifested itself in many people who wish for an Africa free of colonial history, and in some cases those beliefs have become extreme and aggressive. It would be fantastic if Africa had a native name for itself, but I really don't think Alkebulan is that name. But I may be wrong, who knows, I'm just a guy sitting behind a computer in England.
Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.